Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this special edition of Collider Games. This video here on 9/9/2019.
I know, 9/9/99, man. What a day. What a day for gaming.
Yes, and we're here with Marc Fernandez. We're going to talk about a little special anniversary, 20th anniversary of the Sega Dreamcast. I have to admit, my favorite console of all time.
Yeah, I think pound for pound, it's my favorite console of all time too, because of what it meant at the time to me, and how it was the first console that you can plug via a VGA connector directly to a monitor and get true 480p, which at the time was unheard of. Yeah, I mean the Sega Dreamcast, a short-lived console, and then the PS2 came out and like completely demolished it.
Yeah.
But I still think that there's games on the Dreamcast that we haven't gotten as good again since then, you know? So for me, I would say, I don't know if it's my favorite console because I have to admit that the Xbox One is really great and, you know, but yeah, the Dreamcast I think is the most influential console because like when the Dreamcast came out, every other system since then is just basically the Dreamcast with more horsepower.
Yeah, I mean, it did a lot of cool things. One, it had the modem in there for online play. It was the first time non-PC where you could play online games on console. And
SegaNet.
Yeah. Also, you know, they made standard, which I think before precursor was the N64 with the 4 ports, but the Dreamcast had a more emphasis on the 4-player kind of local co-op. There was a keyboard. There were so many accessories for a thing. There was a keyboard. There was like a little fishing thing. There was we'll talk about the Samba de Amigo game with the macro. Like there were so many things on there.
And the joystick itself, I mean, this came out after the N64. So the joystick, the N64 joystick was a really strange joystick that you were kind of supposed to play with one hand and like it had like the analog button was in the stick was in the middle and this was really the first joystick that kind of looks like every joystick we've had ever since then. I mean, it looks very similar to the Xbox joystick, that's for sure. The first Xbox joystick, but yeah, the PS2 joystick. I'm sorry, the PS1 joystick. Yeah, you know what? Now I actually take that back. I'll go PS1 joystick is the most important joystick, but the Dreamcast joystick I think really started to create the kind of the feeling of the joysticks that we have, especially in the Xbox line.
Yeah.
You know, like I always thought that the Xbox was basically the Dreamcast
2.0 or whatever.
2.0.
Yeah.
I mean, like it seemed that the Xbox really picked up everything that the Dreamcast did, even a lot of its titles.
Yes.
And sort of took it to the next level when Sega said, enough with the hardware, we're only going to focus on software.
Yeah, because I could imagine a game like Halo would have been on whatever the next Sega system would come after the Dreamcast 2, if Microsoft hadn't come into the video game industry.
Yeah. So look, today we're going to go through our list. We chatted about it this morning. We went through some pretty exhaustive little debates. Some made it, some didn't. We're going to keep it to 10, and we'll go through our top 10 Dreamcast games.
Yeah, and then we'll have some honorable mentions, too, that are kind of like personal favorites. Yeah,
so why don't we start with the honorable mentions?
Okay. We've got Resident Evil, Code Veronica.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was to say, which was, at the time, an exclusive Resident Evil game, which is huge, because Resident Evil was always kind of known to be on the PlayStation, right? And so when the Dreamcast, when Sega was able to get this kind of exclusive title for it, it kind of changed the perspective that people were like, okay, because Sega had a hard time getting a lot of third parties to come over, right? No Madden was on Dreamcast, so they had to create the whole 2K franchise and stuff like that. So getting this from Capcom was a big coup for them.
I think it was a big coup for them. I don't know if it was enough of a coup for them to keep them alive, but it was a coup for them. I think Resident Evil Code Veronica is a good game. Wasn't my personal favorite in the series. But then again, I'm not a huge Resident Evil fan, period. But the graphics were incredible. It definitely sold a bunch of consoles. And I think that if you look out look out for those top Dreamcast lists out there. A lot of lists are going to have Code Veronica on there because it showed off what the power of the console was and what the next gen of franchise gaming would look like. I think Code Veronica is like, it's exactly that. It showed you that all these big franchises, the Resident Evils and the Metal Gear Solids and the Devil May Cries and like all these big franchises, we're going to start to get these AAA, really good-looking games, and I think Code Veronica is one of those early ones.
Yeah, I didn't own a PS1, but I played a little bit of the Resident Evil franchise, but when I heard it was coming to Dreamcast, I got it, and I was like, okay, so this is what the hype is about, at first I had to get used to the controls, the whole, whatever direction you're facing, you're not moving your character that way, you're pressing like the forward button.
Yeah.
So
it's clumsy.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
Which they've changed now to a more modern. They've gone away from that, and now it's a more modern control scheme. But at that time, it was like, okay, you had to kind of get used to that. But I like the atmosphere, the graphics, the gameplay. It had a creepy vibe to it, So definitely in my honorable mentions. Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Age of Heroes.
I mean, this game, I think, could have easily been in the top 10, and I think maybe I would have put it in the top 10 if it wasn't because all the other games in the top 10 are so unique to the Dreamcast and are so special in redefining the Dreamcast. Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Age of Heroes is a game that was at the arcades, the Neo Geo, and there was so many iterations of it that it's hard to say, oh, that's a great Dreamcast game, even though on the Dreamcast it was absolutely phenomenal. And if there's any Dreamcast emulators out there, it's a must-have for any emulator because it's such a good game. The graphics are gorgeous, the animation is gorgeous, but the playability on Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Age of Heroes is spectacular fighting gameplay.
Yeah, and the gameplay, the controls are spot on, right?
Yeah.
You know how sometimes when they port over a fighting game from an arcade to like a system, and they just don't get the controls exactly right. There's just little quirks that are different from what you play in the arcade, where this game seemed like an exact replica of what you got in the arcade.
Yeah, and it was absolutely gorgeous too. Like the frame rate was incredible. I want to say it was 60 hertz, maybe. I don't even know, but it just even like the emulator. I've actually been playing it recently, especially leading up to this list and just thinking about the Dreamcast. And Marvel vs. Capcom 2 might be one of the games that stands up the best to this day. There's other games that I think stand up better that are on the top 10, but Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is a must-have. If you've never played it and you like fighting games, like stop what you're doing and like install it right now. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah. And here's one from your list. I didn't play this game, but Tokyo Extreme Racer 2.
Yeah, so we called it Shitukuo Battle 2 because we bought this game in Manhattan where I lived. There was a Japanese import video game store in Chinatown called J&L. Yeah. J&L Games, and that's where I got my Dreamcast. That's where I got my PS2 on launch day. But what they really had that was amazing is that they had all the imports of all the Japanese titles. And the Dreamcast, unlike the PS2, didn't require any modifications to be able to play the Japanese games. So you can easily play all the Japanese games. And Shitukuo Battle 2 is this racing game that was out for the Dreamcast. In the States, it was known as Tokyo Extreme Racer. And it was the coolest racing game that I think maybe I've ever played. Hugely inspirational to us at Rockstar when we were doing Midnight Club. It's like the OG Midnight Club in a lot of ways. And basically, it was a sandbox open world game where you drove around your souped up car that was fully customizable, and then you would pull up behind other cars and flash your high beams at them.
Which happened in real life. That's how street racers would call out other street racers. So
you flash your high beams at them, and then it would start a race, and it would automatically set checkpoints throughout the city. And and it looks so good. I mean, that's the thing about Shitukuo Battle is that it just looked so friggin' good that you couldn't believe it. I mean, it was like the Dreamcast was such a jump in graphical quality. I believe it was the first 128-bit system. You know, the graphics on Shituku Battle were just like, what the hell am I looking at here? This is absolutely incredible. So originally I did have this game in the top 10, but I took it out because there was another game I think is better, sort of pushed it out. But it's one of those sort of rare little games that if you've never tried it, it might be tough to find this one out there. But it's definitely one that's a must check out to look at videos and stuff like that.
Yeah, I had a few things that were on my personal list, like Sonic Adventure. I was a big Sonic the Hedgehog fan from the Genesis days. I thought the transition to 3D, because they tried it on the Sega Saturn, didn't really work that well, but they did it right on the Dreamcast. Sega Marine Fishing, I told you, like they had Sega Bass Fishing. I didn't get as much into it because I liked the variety of different fishes that you get. Plus, I had the peripheral. Yeah. I mean, one thing about the Dreamcast was they were not shy about doing peripherals for their
they
games.
loved those peripherals.
They had keyboards. They had the fishing rod. They had the Samba de Amigo,
the maracas.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. This is one of mine that didn't, make the list just because it was personal to me. Was the NHL 2K series.
Oh,
I played the hell out of that game. I love the physics on the puck, and like me and my friends would play that like whole seasons. We play whole seasons through, and just and we just have a blast seeing what kind of goals we could score, our goalies and whatnot. So that was some of my honorable mentions.
Yeah. So look, you mentioned Samba de Amigo, and Samba de Amigo, like I remember it was E3 2000. I think it was E3 2000 that I went to, and it was like the first E3 that I went down to. Kencha, was it Kencha Hall or the hall that was downstairs? And nowadays they don't even use it anymore. But back in the old days, Kencha E3 was so big that there was a hall at the bottom that was also had a bunch of games in it. And it was a lot of these indie games back then. And one of the games that I saw down there, I remember, was Guitar Hero. The very first prototype for Guitar Hero, they were pumping it down there. And next to it was this game that you use these crazy maracas in, and peripheral-based, like, rhythmic gaming was just starting to pop off. And I believe that Samba de Amigo is one of the first ones that ever came out. And you would basically have these two maracas, and you were, like, shaking and dancing. And, like, the game was ridiculous, and you got bored of it pretty quickly. But it's definitely an honorable mention because it was, it was a pioneer in that world.
Speaking of weird games on the Dreamcast, Space Channel 5 and Seaman.
Seaman is the weirdest game probably ever.
The voice was done by Leonard Nimoy, and it was like this weird tadpole-looking creature with a face on it. And you had to buy, speaking of peripherals, a microphone, and you talk to it.
Yeah.
And somehow it would like help transform. It was like a virtual pet thing.
Yeah. I never got into it.
Neither did I, but the Dreamcast did things I don't even think we've ever seen again where people would just experiment like crazy on.
I think that we're going to keep saying that throughout this whole top 10 list, is that this is something that we saw then and we haven't seen it again since then.
No.
Because I think there's that's the signature of the Sega Dreamcast, is how breakthrough it was and how amazing it is that things just haven't caught up to it since then. I mean, there's a lot of things about it that you still haven't caught up to. Like it wasn't just until HDMI came out and HDMI became the standard for computer monitors that you could even play a console on a monitor. Something as simple as that. The Dreamcast had that from day one.
Online play, which is now standard, right? Everyone's on playing Fortnite and Apex Legends and all that stuff. MMOs, World of Warcraft, all that stuff.
All that stuff on the Dreamcast was the first to do it. So I think we covered
all the honorable mentions.
So why don't we start off at number 10?
Yes, we got number 10, Skies of Arcadia, which was kind of Sega's response because Sony and the PlayStation had locked down the Final Fantasy series, which was so popular. So Sega had to create their own kind of JRPG, and they did Skies of Arcadia, which is it's kind of a shame that it hasn't gone and hasn't been a sequel. But it's such a beloved game on the system where it was a turn-based RPG that featured like airship battles.
Yeah,
it had a great musical score. I remember. It wasn't like and it had dialogue. You couldn't hear the dialogue, but you could read the dialogue. What do you think of that game?
So Skies of Arcadia was a game that I did own because it had so much buzz around it from a critical perspective that I had to get it. It wasn't a game that I played a ton.
Yeah.
Because to me, the Dreamcast really started becoming about multiplayer, and we're going to get into a lot of that later. And the weirder games that I got into were more like the culturally relevant ones, which we'll get into later as well. But Skies of Arcadia, I think there's a few things to mention about it that are special. Number one, like you said, it was a JRPG game that was in response to a lot of these other big franchises, and even though it didn't sell that well, critically, I mean, I think it's like in the 90s or something. Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely beloved. Some people say that the fight moves when you get to like level 4, level 5, like in the higher levels, are still stuff that stand up to this day in terms of complexity and gameplay and all this stuff. I never got that far with it. To me, Skies of Arcadia was really cool, but I never played it a ton. And the reason that we took out Shatuko Battle and put in Skies of Arcadia is because you can't deny how many people consider this one of the best RPGs ever made.
Yeah. I played it. I also didn't play it like full on like to completion just because I'm not a turn-based type of guy. I like my RPGs to be real time, even though Knights of the Old Republic is turn-based, even though they trick you and make it feel like it's real time. But yeah, I just remember just the artistry behind the game. It was like, okay, they put some thought and creativity into this.
So Skies of Arcadia number 10. So I'll do number 9.
Okay.
So number 9, top 10 Dreamcast game of all time. And this one I think might be too low on the list. Yeah. But there's so many other great games that I understand why it's here. But Virtua Tennis.
Yeah, I definitely
Virtua Tennis.
I definitely had this high on my list. Absolutely love this game. We were talking about this earlier, how it's the only game, well, maybe not the only game, but the most realistic tennis game I've ever played.
Yeah, look, again, this is going to be a common theme. Like, things that happened in the Dreamcast haven't happened since. And I still think that Virtua Tennis is the best tennis game ever made. Nothing's come close to it. For me, the only other tennis game that I've played recently where I'm like, well, okay, that's kind of close, is Sports Scramble Tennis on the Oculus Quest. Because you're physically playing the tennis and it becomes a different thing. But Wii Tennis wasn't that good. There's been many Virtua Tennises since then. It's not like Virtua Tennis just died.
No. I think they had up to 3 or something like that.
I think they even got up as high as 4.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. But Virtua Tennis on the Sega Dreamcast, that first one that came out, was absolutely incredible. I remember at Rockstar, we used to have a Virtua Tennis tournament. And, like, this is how obsessed everybody was with the multiplayer facet of Virtua Tennis. Because, like, all it was like one dude up top. It's Pong. It was Pong.
Yeah.
But the sun lighting on the characters looks so good.
The
shadows.
Yeah.
And, I mean, this game was absolutely incredible. And I will stand by the fact that I still think to this day no one's made a better tennis game than Virtua Tennis.
Yeah, it's my favorite tennis game of all time. I lived at my fraternity house when that game came out. We had tournaments as well, and everyone had their favorite. And the feel of the way you hit the ball felt like, because I used to play tennis, felt real. Like how the angle that you hit it at, how powerful you hit it at. You want to slice it, you want to do backhand, like where you place the ball. Like when I was playing that game, you know, like when you play games and like something happens, you're like, screw this game.
Right. That's a good point.
Anytime like I hit it out of bounds, I knew I hit it out of bounds.
Yeah, it's a great point.
It was that's how tight the controls were.
Yeah, a very good point. Basically, all you're saying is that it had impeccable gameplay.
Yeah.
And to this day, I stand by it. And you know, that's another game that I might try on the emulator. I haven't tried that one actually. I should try that one. But Virtua Tennis number 9, bow down to the greatest tennis game ever made. And never was it as good as it was on the Dreamcast. I've played other tennis games throughout the years to try to rekindle that flavor. Nothing has ever given me that Virtua Tennis feeling.
No.
All right, number 8. You want to do number 8?
Number 8, we've got, it's got 2 names. One, I think, was in Japan and one here in the U.S. I think it was in Japan, it was called Jet Grind Radio. In America, it was called Jet Set Radio. Another one of those weird games that only on the Dreamcast they could do, and yet people were very accepting. And you start playing, you're like, this is great. This shouldn't work, but it works, right? It's like, it's about like doing graffiti, but yet you're on rollerblades, jumping around the city, and the artistic style to it.
Yeah, the cel-shaded animation is absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, and it's not like this. It was weird. It's like, it's not a game of you going around shooting people or killing people. You're going around graffitiing stuff around the city.
Yeah. And like, look, I worked on Marc Echo's Getting Up, obviously, and you know, when we were making that game, Jet Set Radio was the gold standard of graffiti game. It was the only graffiti game. I mean, to this day, I think there's only 2 or 3 graffiti games, period. But Jet Set Radio, the music, the art style, and the gameplay. I mean, like, you know, it was kind of had a little bit of like Sonic gameplay in there, you know, where you got really fast and you're collecting coins and collecting spray paints, and the way that you would do the spray painting and, like, you know, flip it, turn it around and blah, 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 blah. I mean, absolutely gorgeous. And the style was oozing out of this game. I mean, Jet Set Radio, I did think it got slightly repetitive at times. And the only thing keeping me there was how cool the game was. But the gameplay, I think, at times made me a little bit bored. And when the game was hard, it was a little too hard. And when it was easy, it was a little too easy. Not like Virtua Tennis that had impeccable gameplay. The gameplay, I think, in Jet Set Radio is the knock on it. But, oh my God, like, they don't, to this day, again, they don't make games that push the boundaries like Jet Set Radio did in a mass market sense.
Yeah, and when it got, like, I played it, I really enjoyed it, but, like, I had a friend that played it, and, like, he was hooked. You just played the game all day trying to do different tricks and different, you know what I mean? And try to go through, you know? It captured certain people in a way that, like, they became obsessed with it.
Yeah, absolutely worthy of the list. Jet Set Radio, Jet Grind Radio. Why did they change the name to Jet Set Radio is the only way I remember it.
Me too.
It was called Jet Grind in the U.S.?
No, in Japan. I think it was Jet Set here in the U.S.
Okay. So it's the difference with like Shatuko Battle. I call it Shatuko, but it's actually called Tokyo Extreme Racer here.
Yeah.
Gotcha. All right, so number 6. No.
7.
Number 7. Again, another game that a lot of, like, this one I did play just recently, this exact version of it, and it feels so good. Yeah. And that's NFL 2K by Visual Concepts, and this was maybe the biggest game changer. This one and NBA 2K, and to your point, maybe even NHL 2K, but the 2K Sports Series might be the most important game changer that the SEGA Dreamcast launched. And it all started with NFL 2K, Randy Moss on the cover. And I believe, I don't know if it's NFL 2K 1 or 2, maybe it was 2 and not 1, but it was the very first game in the history of sport games where you could do online multiplayer.
Online multiplayer? It must have been 1. I think 2K 1. Let me look that up, because I remember playing a ton of it with my best friend over the modem online.
Yeah, they only made 2. They only made 2 games.
NFL 2K1.
I believe they only made 2 games on Dreamcast. They made NFL 2K and NFL 2K2.
Is it 2? No, they had 2K1. I remember.
2K,
yeah.
2K1?
Let me look at which one had the online component.
But the online component was through SegaNet. You like did it through the dial-up, I think it was.
I think it was 2K. 2K1 was the first one, if I'm not mistaken. 2K1 was the first one that had online play.
So then they released 3 versions of it.
So the first online console, first console game that you could go online with was 2K1.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And the gameplay was so good.
Yeah.
And it became the standard, the gold standard for football games to this day. And obviously, everybody knows about NFL 2K5. Yeah. That's the greatest football game ever made. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's right to a certain degree. Mm-hmm. Even though obviously Madden has gone through so many iterations, it's kind of hard to compete now. Yeah. But the magic that you got from NFL 2K and NFL 2K1, 2, which I believe were the only 3 on the Dreamcast. Because then they signed with the ESPN. Yeah. Then you got ESPN Football, which is NFL 2K4. Yeah. And then NFL 2K5 was NFL 2K5, ESPN, NFL 2K5. Right. The first 3 were on the Dreamcast, and NFL 2K1 with Randy Moss on the cover was the first game. I mean, enough said. The first football game you could play online multiplayer, and if you play it today, it's still better than like Madden on mobile. Mm-hmm. Let's say, like to make it like equivalent. Yeah. Still better than that. It's absolutely an incredible game.
Yeah. So I bought my Dreamcast $99.99 that night.
You bought it opening day.
Opening day, went to I think it was GameStop. They had a bunch, right? There was EB, Electronic Boutique, GameStop. I can't remember which exact one I went to. Waited in line with my friends at midnight. Get the system. I got 2 games. I got the NFL 2K game and I got Sonic Adventure. And we loaded up 2K and started playing. We're like our minds were blown, right? Because you're so used to like this other football. Like my knock on Madden, it doesn't exist anymore, but my knock on Madden before was every character was like just this little squat, little square guy,
little
right?
Fat little bubble.
Yeah. And I was like, that doesn't look like a football game. This one looked like like you're watching football, and the way that they moved, and like the animations when like you would throw the ball and the receivers would actually outreach their hands and grab the ball. Yeah. The physics
of the tackles. I mean, that's what got me the most, because I literally was playing NFL 2K. 2 last weekend on an emulator. Yeah. I owned the game at some point, so I think it's all legit. But I was playing it on an emulator, and I was so shocked how good the physics were. Yeah. When the players hit each other, like people bounced, like the collision was gorgeous.
And the tackle animations. Yeah. So I played once that thing went online, playing that thing like crazy.
Yeah, I actually did like a fantasy draft, and it was so cool to do a fantasy draft in NFL 2K2 because it's also like a time capsule of the NFL back then. Mm-hmm. So like the top quarterbacks were like Brett Favre and like Dante Culpepper and stuff like that. So anyway, very very cool game and very deserving of the number 7 spot. So, Dennis, want to say number 6?
So, number 6, we've got a similar game in here. We've got the NBA 2K franchise.
Yeah, unbelievable. It's a franchise that's still rocking and rolling to this day. And I'm telling you, you pop in NBA 2K, and there's no... I don't believe that there's a steal button, or there might be, but there's no like spin moves and stuff like that like there's in the new one. But besides a few little moving quirks, it's the same game. Mm-hmm. It's unbelievable how close NBA 2K is to NBA 2K20. 20 years later, this game's been out, and the first one still stands up as an incredible basketball game.
Yeah, it's funny because I've never historically been that into basketball games, but because this was coming under the 2K banner, I decided to get it and play it, and I was blown away about it. And what was cool was I still love the NFL 2K franchise more, but with the NBA 2K was so they had less players, right?
Yeah.
So the graphics were even better than the NFL game. So you had that aspect to it, and just the feel of it, right? The passing, the dribbling,
the faces. Like remember, it's really the first sport game where you could say, "Holy crap!" That's Allen Iverson. Yeah, that's Shaquille. That's Kobe. Because it was the first one where they had like scans of their faces put onto the textures. Unbelievable. NBA 2K. I mean, you can't say enough good things about that game.
So the legacy of NBA 2K is still alive. I'm just mad that the NFL 2K legacy is dead because when they got that ESPN license, I was like, oh, that's it. They're going to battle with Madden. And then
they lowered the price to $20.
Yes. And then Madden bought out the NFL like it was like a monopoly. They bought out as soon as they bought out the NFL license, it was over. I think NFL 2K they tried like a non-NFL version of the game.
It was called All Sports Football 2K8. I believe it was 2K8.
And it's still, the gameplay was great. The problem was they didn't have the license. They didn't have the names.
You could play Dan Marino. Dan Marino was in there, Joe Montana. Like it had a lot of the old classic players. Yeah. Very sad, very sad. And like, look, there's still murmurings that Visual Concepts has like upgraded their engine and has thought about doing it again. But, you know, the license was signed in 2006. And I believe renewed in like 2013 or something like that. It's up again sometime soon.
But the thing is, they already killed the momentum of 2K. It's
over.
like you can't bring it back.
Yeah, NFL 2K5, NFL 2K1, you know, a legacy of sport games that we might never see again.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess I got the next one, right?
Yeah.
So number 5 is a game that I think could be a lot higher on this list. But it was a game that I didn't play a ton of. And I played it fair amount. Not as much as you did.
No.
But it's Phantasy Star Online.
Yeah.
And Phantasy Star 1 on the Sega Master System is probably one of my favorite games of all time because of what it meant to me. Because it was the first time in gaming where I said, okay, I can play a game for 30 hours and save, you know, save. I mean, like that in itself is crazy. Before that, right, because the Sega Master System had cartridges that allowed you to save on it, you had to write codes down.
Yes.
Like literally these 40, 50 digit codes.
And then you'd be afraid to lose the paper that had the codes on them.
Yeah, because
your mom like threw them out or something like that.
Right.
You'd be like,
there was no saving.
Yeah.
Phantasy Star on the Sega Master System had saving. Yeah. It was called the 4 mega cartridge.
Yeah, and it cost more.
So because it had a battery inside or something.
A battery and a chip in there.
Yeah, so you can save games. Yeah. So anyway, so Phantasy Star in my mind was always this like powerhouse of a video game. And then when it came out for the Dreamcast, of course I had to get it. Because I believe in the Genesis there was Phantasy Star 3.
2 and 3.
2 and 3.
I think so.
Which I never played, but people like, you know. But Phantasy Star Online was amazing because it had this lobby system where you could interact with other players. And then they had like a up to 3-player co-op system where you can go do all the adventures with your buddies. Again, breakthrough shit in video gaming that no one had ever seen before.
This is precursor to WoW in Knights of the Old Republic or Old Republic. Yeah.
I mean, this is around the time where EverQuest was just starting to come out, you know? And like, I mean, this is old school online gaming.
Yeah, I play the crap out of this game. It's probably the game I played the most.
So you had this higher probably on your list.
Yes, I did. And so back in the day, remember, you didn't have, now we're all standard with the headphones and the microphones. That way, back then, you had to type on a keyboard. And so like you literally, so if you didn't have the keyboard, you could do like emoticons. From the controller, but if you really wanted to talk to someone
from the VMU,
you typed stuff, and I bought that typewriter just so I could talk to people on there. And you're right, you go into the lobby. Look, there's plenty of things about the game that you know are it's a very repetitive game. There's not many levels. There was like 6 levels. Each level had 3 like sub levels, so really it was like 18 small levels. But the lore of it, which we learned is still appeals today in games like Fortnite or Apex Legends or whatnot, is the loot. But back then, you didn't have to pay for the loot. You got it. You earned the loot. You played the levels, and every time you upgrade, you would play the level, the same levels again, but just on a higher setting. And they would drop certain weapons and mods and all that stuff, and you would just go back for more and more armor. You customize your character in the way you want it. And it was just addictive as hell.
Yeah,
I think,
and so ahead of its time.
Yeah. I think you didn't play it that much then. I bet you if they had like an upgraded version, you'd play the shit out of it right now.
Yeah. I mean, look, Phantasy Star Online. I remember playing it back then and saying, "Wow, this is incredible," because like you were at this space station. And then you go down to the planets and you can go with your friends. I just didn't have a lot of friends that had the Dreamcast. that had an ability to get online.
None of my friends had the game. I played with strangers the whole time. But I didn't care because I was like, that was
all right, so number 4.
Number 4, this game had a Crazy Taxi.
Crazy Taxi.
And it had such a mainstream appeal. It was actually an arcade Sega game that translated and ported over to the Sega Dreamcast so well.
Yeah.
Like usually when you port those arcade games, like I mentioned before, the controls aren't there, the graphics aren't there. But it wasn't like a perfect port, but it was so good that I remember like everyone that had a Dreamcast bought this game because it was so much fun. It's so weird now because like I think these type of games now, it's okay, cool, like it makes sense. But back then it was a wild, crazy idea. You get in a taxi, you pick up people, and then you drive to drop them off at the locations. And the faster that you do it, the more money you get, and you can get power-ups. And it's fun because you're just like plowing through like random like park benches and parks, and people are scattering like crazy. It's just mayhem, but it's like all focused on you trying to get more money.
Yeah, and I think like, the 80-pound gorilla in the room is that this was the precursor more than any other game, and I know this firsthand, and I won't get into specific details, but this was the most important precursor to Grand Theft Auto. Without Crazy Taxi, people might not make that leap from the 2D to the 3D in the way or have the confidence to make the leap. Because I know Dave Jones, for a fact, was the founder of DMA Studios, who invented Grand Theft Auto, did not want to change the isometric Grand Theft Auto style because he didn't think it was possible to do it in 3D, obviously short-sighted. But Crazy Taxi was the proof of concept that it could absolutely be done. And it was an open world game. Like you said, all you did was plow through people as you're picking up fares.
Yeah.
And like the faster, the better. And if you kept grinding that game, the fares would get really hard and really far. And, there was a timer. You had to get there before a certain time. And of course, in GTA 3, there is the taxi game where you hop in the taxi and you do the fares, as an homage to Crazy Taxi. But Crazy Taxi, like, the frame rate was great. The graphics were gorgeous. I believe you were in San Francisco. I think
I think so, because you were going up and down hills.
Yeah. San Francisco. It took place in San Francisco. I'm not even sure that there were sequels to this game. I'm sure there were.
Yeah, I think so.
But like you said, people that had the Dreamcast had Crazy Taxi.
Yeah.
It was the must-have title on the console.
Yeah, and people like my girlfriend at the time would play it because she wasn't into games, but this is a game she could get behind because it was purely a driving game and you were just picking up people and dropping them off.
Yeah.
But is in such a fun way.
Yeah. So now we're getting to the big boys.
Yeah.
And funny enough, this next title is led by women characters and some of the best ones, I think, ever in video games. And this is Dead or Alive 2, coming in at number 3. I mean, this is probably my favorite Dreamcast game. Number 3, Dead or Alive 2 by Team Ninja from Tecmo, the people that brought you Tecmo Bowl. And what a friggin' game this was. I mean, to me, this is around the time that I had seen The Matrix, and The Matrix was really fresh in my head. And I responded to the the fight style of the Matrix and Master Wu Ping Yen and all that stuff. And when I got into the depth of Dead or Alive 2 and what it could do, I was like, man, this is like the Matrix. It's like ballet. Like when you got really good at Dead or Alive 2, and the game, first of all, looked absolutely gorgeous. I mean, forget it. The graphics were beyond. The physics on the bodies were beyond. I mean, it was absolutely insane. But to me, this game was all about the counter system. The counter system in Dead or Alive 2 is a thing of beauty. If you are really in tune with this game, you literally never have to take a hit. And it's not like you just block. Like you're countering into other attacks. And the fight style, again, I think we're up to Dead or Alive 6. I think that's the latest one. I've played them all kind of to like test them out. To me, nothing has come close to Dead or Alive 2. Kasumi, all these great characters, absolutely gorgeous game, which I miss because I miss people being into Dead or Alive 2 like they were back in the day.
Yeah.
Because you had all those competitive things and people got really good at this game to the point that it became, to me, a combat ballet, which I haven't. Look, I'm not hardcore into MK11 or
it's different. It's not the same. It's not the same kind of fighting style.
Because this is 3D. You can move around in a three-dimensional space. Like I know, like a lot of those other games, obviously 3D polygons, but you're fighting in a two-dimensional
plane
Street Fighter 2 style thing. This game was more like Virtua Fighter.
Yes.
Right? So it was more in the Virtua Fighter vibe. But absolutely gorgeous. Dead or Alive 2, I can't say enough about it because, I think pound for pound, Dead or Alive 2 is my favorite Dreamcast game.
So for me, speaking of Virtua Fighter, that was kind of my precursor to Dead or Alive 2 because I played the first Virtua Fighter on the Sega Saturn.
Yeah.
And it was, based off the arcade game, and it did an okay job. But then Virtua Fighter 2 came out, and I loved that game. And that's where I learned the whole kind of how the 3D space actually works in terms of fighting combat versus the, like you mentioned, the Street Fighter Mortal Kombat way. It was just 2D. You just go straight at each other, and how this affected gameplay. And then on the Dreamcast is where Dead or Alive 2 came over, they had the arcade one and they ported it over, and it was all like influenced by Virtua Fighter and having the graphics and the gameplay and the flow of everything go so perfectly together. And like you're right, it's one of those games where it's like, you could play it like a button masher, right?
Yeah.
But if you really wanted to learn the fighting and the style and learning that each character had their own way of fighting, that's where all the deep and complexity came into it.
Yeah, and it just seemed like it didn't matter how much you went into the instructions and try to learn the moves. There was always 15 more moves that like you just didn't know, and I mean, there's not enough good things I could say about Dead or Alive 2. I've played it recently again on this emulator. It's even better than I remember it. It's just it blows my mind because I went on a Soul Calibur kind of kick. I'm sorry, not Soul Calibur. Oops, just spoiled there. Spoiler warning. But I went on a Dead or Alive kick recently, and I downloaded 5, and then I believe there's a new one. I think 6 just came out.
Yeah.
I downloaded both of them, and it's just I'm looking at them, I'm playing it, I'm like, the Dreamcast one is better, but maybe I'm remembering it wrong. So I did the effort, got the good Dreamcast emulator, powered it up on an Android tablet, of high quality. And no, the Dreamcast version is better.
Yeah, that's the thing is consoles will improve graphics and sound and all that stuff. But gameplay from all the way to the Atari, the NES, the gameplay at its core has to be good or perfected, right? So.
Yeah. All right, so I think it's your turn, number 2.
Okay, number 2. This is a game that came out to much critical acclaim. The sales were good, but not as good as I think they wanted because they put a lot of money behind this. But Shenmue. We had 1 and 2 on the Dreamcast from legendary game designer Yu Suzuki, who created Virtua Fighter, Outrun, and a bunch of other
Space Harrier, Choplifter.
Famous Sega games. I mean, he was the kind of the mastermind. Yeah.
Hang on.
Yeah, he's like the mastermind. Remember, you have Miyamoto for Nintendo. He was like that for Sega.
Yeah, and I think to some degree he's the most underrated video game designer of all time because of how vast his body of work is. I mean, this is the guy who made Hang On, Space Harrier, Afterburner. Afterburner was also his. Outrun. Yeah. I mean, he defined an entire era of coin-up arcade games, and always at the highest quality, right? Because if you were a kid back in the late 80s, early 90s, you went into an arcade and you wanted to play the best game in the arcade, the best game in the arcade was Afterburner, right? Because it had the hydraulics and it moved around and it was just mind-blowing. That was his game. Space Harrier, his game. Outrun, his game. All of the top stuff. And then the Dreamcast comes around and he makes what I think is a masterpiece to the point that I also played this game just recently, Shenmue 1, the first one, and there's levels of immersion in this game that you achieve that I think are still unmatched to this day, even by games like Red Dead Redemption 2. That's like the epitome, I think, of like open world sandbox.
Yes, and was heavily. I mean, that's the thing. But with Shenmue, is that open world sandbox environment really didn't exist to the extent until Shenmue came out, right?
Yeah, and look, let's also remember this game also invented the quick timer event. And look, I'm not a huge fan of the whole quick timer event thing, but if you played the Spider-Man game, this new one, on the PS4, Spider-Man. It uses quick timer events all the friggin' time. And there literally is no difference between the quick timer events in Spider-Man as there are in the quick timer events in Shenmue, which is the first game to ever do it. Also, basically any game ever made by our former friends at Telltale. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
Every quick time event mechanic in there, there's a lot of them in those games. All of that comes from Yu Suzuki's masterpiece, Shenmue. But to me, the thing about Shenmue that's the most haunting, I just played it recently. I just installed it on the SEGA Dreamcast emulator. But you can also buy it. It's available on the Xbox One and the PS4. And I think it's $20. And if you've never played it, I actually suggest you play it because it's still incredible to this day. But there was something about this game that I just rediscovered recently that blew my mind. Is that the game works on a day-night cycle.
Yes.
Okay. And it's amazing how the pedestrians and the NPCs of this game work, because when you wake up at 8 in the morning and you go back down to the city to keep doing your missions, it's actually quite painful and punishing. But the stores are all on different schedules. And you might not be able to do what you're supposed to do until 4 p.m. Yeah. So you basically get down there to the city at 9 a.m. and it's dead. Yeah. And it feels like morning. It feels exactly how you feel when you get somewhere too early and you have to wait. The game completely recreates that through experience. And to me, it's a mind-blowing level of immersion that they created with that game. I know it sounds a little bit weird, but the fact that you walk around that city and it feels like morning time, when it is morning time in the game, but not because they tell you it's morning time, because it feels it in your heart it's morning time. It's absolutely incredible. And just a few last things. You go to the arcade, and you can play Hang On at the arcade. You can play Space Harrier at the arcade. Mini games galore. No game had mini games like this.
I mean, think about all those random events, encounters that you get in Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2. That was in Shenmue, right? You would run into the girl who wants to take care of a kitten. There's an old lady that needs some help. All these things would happen when you walked around the city, and only at specific times of the day. And
there's not one duplicate NPC. Yeah. Every single NPC is unique. Every single NPC has a different day-night routine. Walking into the stores, buying the little collectible toys. Again, collections, achievements. All of these things that we take for granted now in video games that are must-haves didn't exist before Shenmue. Hearing me talk about it makes me think Shenmue should be number one, but it is boring as hell at times. It's absolutely painful.
The thing is, the control mechanism with the game structure is not perfected yet. We see that perfection in Red Dead Redemption 2, right?
Right.
Which is many, many years later. This was the birth of the idea of doing these things, but they hadn't polished the gameplay down into what it could be. Imagine if they took Shenmue 3 is coming out. I don't know how
Yu Suzuki's not involved or anything, I don't think.
I don't know.
Is he still alive? I don't even know if he's alive.
I think he's still alive. But I don't know if I think they want to keep it old school and keep it same as kind of how it was. But imagine if you took what that was and modernized it for today.
Yeah, and it's funny because I actually just played it recently. I probably dropped about 12 hours into it recently. And the story is actually really weird. Yeah. And there's some parts of it that I think today would play out very strange. because you got to remember it all takes place in Japan, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
The dojo
Great
and
soundtrack too.
The soundtrack and like in your house you have like this little pond with koi swimming in it. I mean, the attention to detail in this game is mind blowing. But there's slightly insensitive parts, or maybe it's from the lens of where I am today. But there's like missions where you're literally just looking for Chinese people, and you're asking everybody on the streets, "Hey, do you know Chinese people? Where could I find Chinese people?" And then the next mission is, "Hey, does anybody know where I can find sailors?" Yeah. You know, so it's like the translation sometimes leaves a little to be desired.
And it had voices too. Remember, it was
everything unique voices too for everybody.
Yeah, and remember, it was not one disc; it was multi-disc.
It was 4 discs.
Yeah, multi-disc.
Shenmue 1 was 4 discs.
Yeah. Which was unheard of at that time.
Yeah, so this one I actually don't recommend you do the emulator version of it, because the saves, like what happened to me was my save got corrupted, and I lost 12 hours of gameplay.
Oh my God.
But they do have the game Shenmue 1 and 2. You can buy it as a packet for $20 on Xbox One SX and 1, and on PS4 you can buy it for $20. Totally worth it if you like retro gaming. But also, like, another thing about this game is that because it is from the creator of Virtua Fighter, there's an entire 3D, highly complex fighting system in the game that doesn't get used enough, in my opinion. Yeah. But again, with like 50 moves that you can master,
and you got to learn them all. You progress your character
and train them. Yes. Yeah. So anyway, Shenmue at number 2 might be too low, but it's kind of hard to argue with the next game. So I'll just go. It's my turn, right? Yeah. So the next game, I think it's pretty much the unanimous best game on the console. And it's hard to argue with it, even though I personally like Dead or Alive 2 a little bit more. It's hard to argue that when you were with your friends playing this game, nobody had more fun as a group than playing Soul Calibur. The Stage of Victory, or whatever it was called. The Stage of Victory. Soul Calibur. I mean, incredible graphics, super rapid fire gameplay, and just, you know, everything about it was absolutely perfect. But the best thing about Soul Calibur, in my opinion, was how unanimously everybody loved playing it. And everybody agreed that it was good. Like, it wasn't like people were like, "Oh, Dead or Alive, the graphics look great, but I don't love the counter system." Or Shenmue, it's like, it's too weird, it's too, you know. Soul Calibur, you popped it in. It didn't matter who you were having fun with it.
Yeah, it was a virtual fighter, but with weapons. It had better graphics. It was, and if I remember correctly, it either was a launch title or at least a year 1 title.
Yeah, it was early.
It was early, I remember, because like everyone was like 9.8 out of 10, 9.9 out of 10. Like, it was just beloved by everybody.
And I still think on Metacritic, it's still the number 1 ranked rated game on the Dreamcast. But again, this is a game that has had many, many, many iterations since then. Same characters, Keeleek and all this crap. And or is Keeleek Dead or Alive? I think actually Keeleek is Soul Calibur. I get those two confused because I would play those two so much. But Soul Calibur, to this day, today's version of Soul Calibur, I think it's at 5 or something like that also. Again, not as good as it was on the Dreamcast.
Yeah, the controls are super smooth. Frame rate was great. Graphics, like you'd never seen. I remember that was like the game you showed to people,
right?
About the best Dreamcast graphics.
Yeah. See, to me, it's funny because to me, that game was Shenmue and Dead or Alive 2. But then again, I think Dead or Alive 2 I was so into because I played my Dreamcast on a PC monitor. And there was something about like the female characters and like their clothing and like their noses and like everything was so precise, you know. With Soul Calibur, you're right, and like I think you nailed it on the head. Soul Calibur, I think, is as powerful as it is because it had weapons. Yeah. It had the swords, it had the ninja, it had the polearm. You know, like it really.
And the guy with what was his name that had the knives on his fingers or whatever? Oh,
I forgot his name, but yeah. So look, man, makes
Voldo.
Voldo. Yeah. Soul Calibur masterpiece. I think. Look, I think it was a good list. What are your thoughts?
Like I said, Dreamcast to me, it will always hold a special place in my heart. Look, when I think about my favorite games of all time, I've mentioned before, like we recently played Red Dead Redemption 2. I'm a big fan of the Fallout franchise, the Mass Effect franchise, and none of those existed on the Dreamcast. Those came later on. But in terms of that, when I think back of when my ultimate highest peak of where video games gave me the ultimate high was when I was playing the Dreamcast. Because there was just so many new things I was experiencing with this system that I hadn't experienced before.
Yeah. Oh, look, you know what? Throw another honorable mention into the mix. Star Wars Pod Racer on the Dreamcast was absolutely incredible. Yeah. And it was around that time, right? 99. Yeah. The movies had just come out. Phantom Menace had just come out. But I'm with you. There's something so beautiful about the Dreamcast. It was the first time where you saw video games and where they were going and where the computational power was going to take you. And it became about, then it became a polygon race, And I think because the Dreamcast was the console that still had a lot of pressure on gameplay, and it was the first to really pump out the polygons, that there was some kind of perfect marriage there of a combo of gameplay and graphics, which now I think we've skewed so far to the graphics that a lot of games don't focus on the gameplay as much.
It also was, at least for me, the best party console, right?
Yeah.
The best, because I remember with the first Xbox, I had a lot of Halo LAN parties, right? But it was just Halo. Just that one game where this one was like, okay, let's pop in this one. Crazy Taxi. Okay, let's pop in this one. Let's pop it. You would play various different games and everyone was involved.
Yeah. So Dreamcast forever. Happy 20th birthday. I can't believe 20 years ago.
Yeah, I know.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right, guys. So thanks for listening to our special episode of Collider Games, talking about the Dreamcast, our top 10 games, celebrating the 20th anniversary. Let us know what your favorite games are from the Dreamcast, what you remember about that system specifically. Marc, where can people find you?
At Marc Fernandez on Twitter, and every Monday, Rule of 2, 5 p.m. PST.
Yeah, and you guys can find me on Twitter at ThinkHero, Instagram, Dennis.tzng. Make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel, youtube.com/Collider Games. And we'll also put this on the Collider Factory podcast feed for everyone to listen to. So until next time, we'll see you guys later.